Hello, everyone, and welcome to another horrific chat. This segment, of course, if you have seen them before, is where we talk to independent creators, various creeds, mediums, get to know a bit about them, their works, and obviously their journey into horror. So tonight, I'm joined by author Andrew Nyberg, who I believe it was one of my dodgy posts on a Facebook group you reached out. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very rare I post on social media. Now. I've got really bad. I know I'm meant to be like plugging and stuff, but I'm terrible at that sort of stuff. And yet I'm trying to encourage people to like come on and promote themselves, and I hardly do it myself. So it was great that you reached out, and obviously pleasure meeting you. Welcome to the show. How's life treating you?
Uh, First off, thanks for having me. And yeah, it's been going great. You know, um, I'm a teacher, and the semester just ended, and that's literally one of the single highlights of every single year. It's better than my birthday. It's better than Christmas because it means that I won't be in a classroom for 3 full months. And at that point, it's when I spend the most time focused on writing, on my kids, on some video gaming. The things that I'm paying the bills to be able to do.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Like well, like at the moment I'm working two jobs because a company I worked for last year, document management place, asked me to come back. I'm like, well, I can do Saturdays if that helps you. And sure enough, Saturdays is turned into bank holiday weekends. And can you stay later? And had another stream on earlier with on a friend's channel, and they're like, no, I have to leave. I have really important stuff to do. Yeah, it's nerdy stuff, but it's really important. You got to understand. What's the point in living? And working yourself, slogging away if you're not going to enjoy life. It's. Do you think a lot of people forget that? They get so caught up in being successful, their career, or stepping up the ladder that they actually forget that there's a life to live.
Well, yeah, I mean, if let's say you do the standard thing and you work the stereotypical 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, that's what 30, almost 30% of
40 hours.
your, yeah, 40 hours, and some people work 6 days, some people have a second job, some people have they work even longer hours, and so you're working what 30, 40, 50% of every single week is given over to that. And first off, if you don't enjoy that, that's already a lot of your life you've consigned over to just misery. And then, if you do like it, even though if it's not the thing you love, then you still have to find ways to take care of things you're really passionate about.
Yeah, I find out what creators that I did have some questions, but anyone that knows this show knows that we love tangents and just going on random little paths, see where it leads us. But a lot of people, I think, they either tie their creativity to their career, especially in this, they think they have to be mega successful, top 10 best-selling author to enjoy writing, or like an agent like me getting on camera and talking a lot. Thinks some of them think they have to be like top 10 streamers. That's the only way to enjoy a creative outlet, and it must tie in with their career. But it is possible, and we were kind of just having a wee chat before we went online about having a fulfilled life, and balance. What pays the bill doesn't have to take over your entire life,
Oh yeah.
and it doesn't have to be your creative outlet. You can you can separate the two, have a different outlet for your creativity, and it doesn't have to even make you money. As long as it doesn't cost you too much,
Oh,
and it's still
absolutely.
rewarding.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if nothing else, it's even from the writing point of view, it's only been recently that I've gotten real traction with my writing.
Mhm.
The novel just came out. It's my first like really solid book out there. Before that, I mean, I wrote poetry for 17 years, and I mean, I've got pretty nice little publication record over time. But I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it's poetry. It doesn't exactly pay, but I enjoyed every minute of doing it. And my wife loves to paint. My kids definitely, we have art time whenever we can, just because I think it's just a healthy part of your daily life to carve time to focus on just expressing yourself. And your creativity can be any form that you want. It doesn't have to be writing or a traditional medium like art or music or something like that. But yeah, I think I think we like to feel like we have voices, that we like to put pieces of ourselves fit like literally into the world in some sort of tangible form. And, you know, it definitely, really, it should just be this thing that we do for its own sake. Sure, it's great when you also tie it into other things, and maybe part of your work is creative, but yeah, I mean, sometimes you just want to make something just to make something, and you just want to speak just to speak.
Yeah, and that's it. And this channel's all about we need more creators out there, especially when you've got. I'm not a fan of the corporate sludge. That just these
Oh.
grey, boring people that seem to be in charge of all media for some reason. That includes writing as well. Like the big five publishing houses, film has to come from like one tiny group of studios. I know I've talked about this ad nauseum, so anyone's on now sick and tired listening to me about it. But do people feel that it's so hard that if you don't make a success that you can't try it and see? Like we've had our segment Horrific Tales featured over 100 stories at this point, and quite a few of them at the end are just people that aren't necessarily authors or writers. They've just had a short story and they just wanted to put it out there, and that's all hard. Did that to say thank you very much and then never hear from them again. They've kind of got their outlet, and that seems to be enough. Is that all someone has to do to be considered a creative or release that creative energy?
I mean, I'd say so in a way. I mean, there's people who are creatives who, they never get their work out there. It's just something they do for themselves. And, I think that everybody has sort of a different balance that they want between the public and the private aspects of their creativity. Sometimes somebody is just going to, they'll get home and they'll make their dinner and maybe they'll just sit there and sketch while they eat, and they crumple it up and throw it in the trash by the time, along with the leftover of their meal. And they never dream of sending it out somewhere. I mean, I don't see how that's tangibly different as being, in terms of creative practice than somebody who is actively working to send their stuff out there. I mean, there's definitely measures of success that we can kind of delineate. I'm in academics, for example, and they definitely have various tiers of how they recognize creative success. So, a book through a nationally distributed publisher is one. A book through a minor publisher is another measure of success. Having a handful of magazine publications or online publications or running your own podcast, is something that a lot of people would consider. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely going to be different ways to decide how much we want to be putting our work out there. But I think the key is that I think it's healthy for everybody to embrace that creative side and, to be a quote unquote creative. I think the regularity of your practice is really the main defining point.
Yeah. And people get bogged down. I think sometimes with these metrics, and that's what puts them off because they think they have to achieve. And even just the act of creating itself can be mentally stimulating, can like spark the imagination. I think that's what makes us so unique as a species, our imagination. And the more we foster that, and I worry that in today's society, and it's something I want to broach on, but that's getting kind of stripped away because everything's laid out in front of you. And I worry, especially generations below. I think we're lucky enough that we can step away from the internet and the social media because it's wasn't always part of our lives, but someone that knows no other way. I do worry in this society, where we're going without it. There's Chris just saying hi, and even if it's just for half an hour, whatever else, you don't have to be a bestseller. I think that's it. You don't have to worry about success, if that makes sense. It's the act of creating, like you brought up, Andrew, is important. That's the bit that makes you sense of achievement, even if it's a sketch drawing.
Oh yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. One thing that I think is really important about, hobbies, about creativity and things like that is when we sit down to make something, first off, we're doing it with a sense of focus. Basically we're kind of stripping away a lot of other things. And, I know, for example, that, even in a non-modern life, I mean, it's so easy to get bogged down in things like the stresses of work, anxiety about families, anxiety about money, and other problems like that. We tend to have a lot of thoughts that are cycling through our heads at any given point, and some of them are going to be positive and some are going to be negative. But then you start throwing in these highly enticing distractions, things like social media feeds, where in a lot of ways, they're far more, in a very basic sense, stimulating than a lot of other activities. You can literally sort of, just for example, feed your sense of humor on social media just by scrolling through memes and other very short, punctuated, comedy sources. And so, you can entertain yourself at this rapidity of stimulation. And so when we do sit down to create, one thing we are deliberately doing is slowing ourselves down, brushing away a lot of those things that are constantly eating at us for our attention. And then we just pay attention to this little space in front of us. And, it's something it's part of us because we're creating on it, whether or not it be, painting, whether it be a screen that we're writing on or a notepad, or a guitar that's in our hands or something like that. Doesn't matter what format it is. We basically kind of create this own little world that is just us existing in it for a little while. And I think we need that kind of refreshment, because otherwise we're just on all the time. We're constantly buzzing with stimulation, with entertainment. And I think having ourselves focus and create our own pace of experience for a bit's crucial.
Yeah, and there's Adam's at his hobbies supplement his profession, so of course important to explore creativity. Yep. That's what's good. And you brought it up very well there. Social media, I guess, short form content, instant stimuli. Do novels and stories still have relevance and a place? It's easy to think that, like it started out 5 minutes was considered short form content. Now it's down to a minute. It's probably going to be 30 seconds before too long. The attention span of people is getting shorter. Do novels, long form stories, do they still have a chance out there? Is it a dying art, or do you think we're going to get it back, or is it completely misrepresented by what maybe we see in front of us, and it's not the real story?
So I'd actually definitely say that I don't think it's a dying format right now. I do think that it does have a lot of competition in sort of the broad scope of mass media. When we're thinking about, if you want to create something that's going to reach 100 million people, when we start talking like Harry Potter level audiences, Stephen King level audiences, where just everybody has encountered it, explored it, and things like that. That does have, I think, a legitimate difficulty with longer form works right now. I think it's extremely challenging for novels to do that, but that doesn't mean it's not important. I mean, after Harry Potter, we had things like the Hunger Games that sort of exploded out into a really huge readership. But that being said, one thing that I've noticed really lately is in the last couple of years, there's just been an absolute explosion of novels in the indie writing scene. Over the last few months, I've joined in, a bunch of horror-related forums and other indie writer forums, and they are unbelievably lively. And there's authors out there that are actively, regularly selling thousands and thousands of copies of books. Certainly enough that it's not what we would consider failed endeavor. I know, for example, the press that put out my book, Wicked House. We've been seeing really solid sales. All of the authors, whose books have come out through there have gotten really good attention from readers. There's a lot of people who want that experience. And I think to some extent, that experience is sort of harder to market on a much broader level, like, especially on like a corporate level.
That's the death of any creativity.
Yeah.
Once they get involved.
And And so yeah, like Barnes and Noble, Walmart, and Target, and all them. I mean, there is a clamp on a lot of the presence of exploring novels, but at the same time, yeah, I think there's a tremendously supportive independent community out there that's just absolutely ready to devour books, because that idea of just immersing yourself in your imagination of a world that patiently unfolds on pages in front of you, I think it's a kind of experience that no other medium really provides, because it's a relationship between ourselves and a reader, and the text. We're not just being
Mhm.
fed the information like we are in a movie or a
Yeah,
virtual
and that's
reality.
where the great discussions always the movie versus the book. We've done
Hmm.
quite a few of them in the show. What we might have thought in our heads, and that's one thing. A lot of our returning authors, we jump on and we do movie reviews or book reviews, just for a bit of a laugh, and that's what we always bring up. My what I thought in my crazy head wasn't the same as somebody else's crazy head. And that's the beauty of it.
Hmm.
That's imagination, and that's what makes and that's the problem with corporatization. Everything has to fit into a box. So if
Hmm.
we market and sold a certain way, in fact, two of my good friends who jump on here, we're going through the Clive Barker series of movies at the moment,
Hmm.
and like every time the studio gets involved with his projects, they don't know what to do with them, and it
Yeah.
just shows, and it's so painful sometimes, and it's like, come on, that if you've read his, and a lot of his books are short, they're short stories, so it's not as if a corporate exec you can read it the weekend, so it's not as if you have to like hurt yourself to read the source material and know who you're dealing with. Um, like we've covered loads of stuff, but that's the beauty of it. That's not always a bad thing. What you have thought of appears on screen. You go, oh, I didn't think it was going to be like that, but I kind of like that, but also like what I thought too. It's
Oh yeah, no. I've watched quite a few adaptations that turned out pretty
sorry, excuse me.
differently. Oh, you're fine. You're fine. That turned out pretty differently than I would have expected. But I was, really interested to see this particular artistic interpretation. One thing that I find really odd about especially the movie industry, and this might sound slightly controversial in some ways, is that there's this really curious popular sentiment to things like reboots and restarts. And now here's the thing about it, though. Here's the thing about it. On the
Sorry.
one
So
hand,
what? I'm
well,
awake. I'm awake. Honest.
on the one hand, the problem they always run into is the sensibility from which they're rebooting them, that they're rebooting them because they're trying to update them to match the times. And so, one of the best examples is the absolutely horrific, and I know this isn't horror, but it's like it is because it was just painful and unpleasant to
Horror can be
watch.
real life sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The reboot they attempted of the show Willow on Disney Plus. The old one has
You're
attained
going
a
to
bit of a
upset some
cult.
of the. Look, we've got nerds in the chat. Just careful what you say. I don't want to get
And
mobbed.
oh no,
There's two
no.
in particular here. They might jump on us. just
So
just careful where you go forward.
well, I loved the original movie. I grew up with it. I'm a child of the '80s, and so it definitely played a particular role when I was young. But one thing that really struck me about the reboot was the forced sense of humor, where you have an established world. It had its own tone and voice, but you have extremely modern jokes being made by all of the characters. They could easily have been on any television show, set in 2022. And it was extremely jarring to me. And it felt like that was a large chunk of the reason that it was being remade, was they wanted to sort of create this new hipper version that fit modern aesthetics. Now, the reason I brought that up, though, is I've always also been really interested in theater as well. And theater has remade and rebooted and reperformed show after show after show to great and tremendous effect, with tons of memorable interpretations and performances over the centuries, actually. So
Actually, one that's absolute classic that people don't realize is a remake, which he covered, Little Shop of Horrors.
oh yeah, absolutely. No, it's
There's
and
two completely different shows. Both the first one was a classic stage show. Both still watchable. Both a lot of fun. but completely different interpretations.
Absolutely. And, one of my favorites was always The Thing. In fact, I have a huge poster of The Thing right over my computer
Mhm.
here. You just can't see it. But
I can't. That the 2011 one's supposed to be a prequel. I
I,
still haven't watched it. I just can't bring myself to do it.
so I
I've
was
heard it's a
referring to
mess.
well, so you can, here's the thing about watching that movie. I'm going to confess that I overall like it, but that's kind of in some ways the teacher in me, because
Hmm.
I spend a lot of time teaching creative writing. And so I also, and I look for what's good in the piece. And then I like to think about pieces that you can improve upon. And so I love flawed movies, actually, because I can sit there and I can kind of brainstorm. Okay, so what could we have done differently? How could this have played differently? And I love that kind of engagement. But so the thing that killed The Thing, though, the remake, or not the remake, sorry, the prequel, is they ditched the practical effects at the last minute. The studio, like they had wonderful effects. You can see it in the featurette that was released to help promote the film, and they're straight out of John Carpenter. I mean, it's all these physical puppeteering, really cool, creepy images. The studio panicked because they thought it felt too like it was made in the 1980s, and it's like, yes, that's exactly what they were going for. They wanted to capture the same creature from the original, and and so instead they took everything that they'd done, they threw it out halfway and just slapped CGI over everything. And otherwise, though, the story itself, they it's you can tell it was lovingly made. That was one that actually had tremendous respect for the source material. They were very detailed in their recreation of the Norwegian sets. They really worked to have it fit seamlessly with the original film. But then every time the thing emerges, you just want to cringe, because the CGI just doesn't fit with any of the other stuff that they were doing, and it's almost heartbreaking, because you can watch it and see, oh my gosh, they were so close to doing something that could have been really, really cool, and studio meddling
I have
absolutely
asked
stank
this question loads of time. When has a studio interfering with a movie been a good thing?
it. Yeah,
It's
like
it
I'm
never ends
sure.
well.
Yeah, I'm sure that if we were to dig super deep, we'd find one example where some guy had this really great idea and was like, I see a problem here. Otherwise, though, it's much more likely to end with a giant steaming pile of crap being taken on the film. So,
Been sitting on a short story for 20 years. Well, that's not as long as some of my things I've sitting on the shelf. You know what I mean? Just right fucking over it.
it,
That's part of the problem with creativity, especially the horror genre. You're putting you're putting a bit of yourself out there, but you're putting the dark part. And you mentioned like the mainstream bookstores, probably Barnes and Noble have got a horror section like right at the back, behind curtains, step no further here, or lose your soul. But you're never going to see it in those supermarket books. That's all generic,
oh
bland.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's it.
Or I will say the medium of the airport bookstore. That is a classic example of blandness.
Oh
You go
yeah,
into like an airport
absolutely.
bookstore, that's bleh.
If it's possible for it to have a complaint registered about it, it will not be there.
Yeah, that's a really difficult thing though. Especially if it might like your profession, for example, people would expect you to be very milk toast, sort of nice, bland, and we've had the conversation about nice creators. I know horror is some of the nicest people I've ever met. That's the
Well,
great thing about it. But
like the people
this
who listen to death metal.
perception of, oh, I wanna, how can you think up of such things, or how can you put that out there, and then that can actually do harm against your life because people just can't, and we all have those thoughts. And everyone that denies they do, they're the ones that worry about, they're the ones that act on them because they repress themselves so much it becomes like a pressure cooker. But
Well, I mean,
has that been an issue? The type of material you create?
so far, no. Like the only issue I've ever run into is that I do work with some consciousness over prejudices about genre writing in general in the
Hmm.
academic world. For the most part, while I I do write some pretty harsh horror. A lot of my horror is emotional horror. I deal with a lot of things like trauma, loss, and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I haven't delved with my own writing into some of the more extreme horror elements. There's some books out there that definitely would probably come across differently in an academic environment. So,
We've
you
probably
know,
had them on this show as well.
possibly,
Feature some of their
possibly.
stories, you know what I mean?
And
Which I'm more than happy with.
oh
You've
yeah,
actually got quite an eclectic mix. I was having a look at your sort of catalog. You know, like I said, your poetry, but you do sci-fi. I've seen a bit of paranormal, or I've seen like what would be described as adventure thriller. You know what I mean?
mhm.
You seem to cross the whole broad spectrum. Do you normally just wander, or is it just a case of, oh, I want to try this, or how does that all come about?
So there's a couple different ways, honestly. I mean, to some extent, I literally sometimes do just sit down and just be like, okay, so I want to write something. What do I want to write tonight? And sometimes like I watch a lot of movies, I read a lot of books,
Mm-hmm.
and in a lot of different directions. I don't particularly do romance. I can't get into it. But otherwise, I don't really have any barriers about things that I will and will not engage with. And so, the ideas tend to come in almost any form. And, I'm usually pretty interested in chasing down whatever felt inspiring at the time. But no, so I will admit though, at the same time, I do try to have unique entries in my catalog. I
Mm-hmm.
don't like actually one of my biggest things is while I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea of writing a sequel, I'm not looking to start franchises. The book that I've got out now is a standalone.
Mm-hmm.
In theory, there's an ambiguity to the ending that some folk have asked me about, and they'll ask me, did he do that so that you could set up a sequel? And really, my answer is no. I find ambiguity to be unsettling, and so
Do you think that's a problem as well? The way media has gone in entertainment, where everything has to be spelt out, and there's no room now for the audience member or the consumer to make up their mind, the customer, or an ending's left. Like that's one of the things about horror. Horror was a staple of the ambiguous ending.
Mhm.
That's always the thing of did they, didn't they? Is the killer alive or the dead? Did they survive? Did they not survive? Or one of my favorite genres, warp reality. So
Mhm.
was it a dream? Was it a reality? But now it seems to be this, I don't know, coddling of, people aren't given enough credit for having intelligence.
Uh,
It's actually quite insulting the way people are talked to now, like they're babies. Even the language has changed. That's really, and you've probably found it like you're in one of the flipping bedrocks of it. Main culprits. Let's be honest, of this baby language of I just find it frustrating. But does that ruin creativity that now people expect to be told it, and if they're not, they're confused and worried? Or can we get away from that?
so like there's a couple questions embedded in that. The does it ruin creativity? I don't know that I would go that far, because if nothing else, one of my favorite stories of all time, I think it's one of the most impactful and meaningful stories, is by Shel Silverstein, The Giving Tree.
Mhm.
And I've read it to my kids, tons of times. And, literally it makes me cry half the dang time because it's just such a brutally honest depiction of some of the difficulties of parenthood, and just how painful it can be. So I mean, you can do tremendously creative things with that kind of stripped down limited toolkit. But the problem comes in that it does tend to limit variety. It definitely limits experimentation. And it also can kind of cage in how you handle some of the concepts you're working with. That's part of, I think, though, something that's drawn me to both horror and science fiction. That those are two genres that in no way have particularly pretended to be sort of targeting all ages simultaneously. That
Hmm.
there's a presumption going into both of those in a lot of cases, unless it's like stamped all over the cover that we're talking to an adult audience. And so I think I think that sort of takes off the gloves a little bit for us, and it gives us a bit more freedom to tackle some more difficult material.
Yeah, I don't think people realize, and it's obviously something that brought up a lot in this show, is that horror is so widespreading. Everyone just thinks slasher, that's it.
Mhm.
And it's couldn't be further from the truth. And we have had loads of wonderful examples of just movies crossing just all sorts of topics. Is there a sense of freedom that you could have so much variety without actually leaving the horror genre? Do you know any other genre that provides that? Like you mentioned science fiction, but you're very tied down. Like science fiction to me seems to be the rules of the technology,
Mhm.
where a lot of, especially science fiction books.
Mhm.
Arthur C. Clarke, he's one of my favorite authors. But still science fiction grounded, and they have to explain the technology and then maybe the society. Isaac Asimov's another one, he's stuck with the societal, but you're kind of grounded. If you step away from that, you can't really go into like sci-fi fantasy. It's
Mhm.
very difficult. Where you can have horror fantasy, you can have horror sci-fi, you can have horror romance. There's what is it? Swim Fan would be considered that, or Poison Ivy.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? There's probably loads of other examples. Just sorry, my tiny brain only thinks of so much at once. It's the joys of doing this live and not pre-recorded with scripted answers. I can't sound clever, but yeah, you can. Look, does the horror give us that freedom that you can explore things like you said? Is there more of a sense of accomplishment being a horror author as
So,
opposed to another genre, or not feeling as
well,
locked in?
so I don't know if I'd say more of a sense of accomplishment because, I mean, writing excellently in any genre is tremendously challenging. I mean, heck, honestly, writing an excellent romance novel
Hmm.
would be a tremendous feat, and they do exist. I
That would
mean,
be a
there are some,
tremendous feat.
yeah.
Sorry, I'm something.
No, I'm sure. I'm sure they do exist. I'm sure that there are some
No.
excellent craftspeople who are able to sort of understand the genre, what it's meant to do, and be able to tweak all of its details to maximize those effects. And I think that's impressive no matter what genre you're doing. I mean, one of the reasons I write is because I love the idea of being able to move people to feel and experience things with my work. And so, whatever form you're doing that in, if you're successful, I really do admire it. Now, that being said, I think horror and its sort of literary cousin, magical realism, um, both have some abilities to break expectations and transgress in ways that a lot of other genres will find more difficult. So, you mentioned, for example, that science fiction does tend to find itself locked in by the need to adhere to some sort of at least reasonably consistent scientific development. So,
Mhm.
one of my favorite series is the Leviathan Wakes series, The Expanse by James A. Corey, or the two authors under that name. And it's a wonderful story. It's very well thought
Oh, that's the
out.
one that did the not so long ago, the TV show.
Yeah, The Expanse. The
Yeah,
Expanse.
after the third season, I kind of struggle with that.
It does. So season
It
four
starts to tie
shifts.
itself up in knots because they're struggle with the whole political power base,
Mhm.
so they can't come together because they have to have that, and then it just ties itself up and can't go anywhere because everybody has to be at loggerheads, and then you can't really.
Mhm.
It's good
Well,
at the beginning, but then it gets really exhausting.
Well, and if you if you kind of push past the jump from 3 to 4, it actually does resume a good stride after that. The
Hmm.
authors wrote it as three separate trilogies that just tell a single linear story. So books 1 through 3 are one story, 4, 5, and 6 are another, 7, 8, and 9 are a third, and
Hmm.
then they also just fall in a chronology with each other and have overlapping characters. But like 4, 5, and 6 or their own narrative arc that's entirely, in a lot of ways, independent of the others. It's not like, I mean, they still have the proto-molecule and all that stuff, but
Mhm.
they definitely stand, there are different storytelling in them.
Yeah, they're almost forgotten about by season 3. They've forgotten about the proto molecule, which is supposed to be
Mhm.
the major threat, the story, because it just
And
got bogged down with the, like I said, the infighting and the politics and the
mhm.
backstabbing. It's like, I'm not watching a soap opera. You
Well, they
know,
call it a space
that's
opera, to be fair.
yeah. But the kind of devolved into a soap opera.
Mm-mm.
That's where I had a struggle. It's like, ah,
No,
you can see
that's
that a
fair.
hundred times anywhere else. But if you went to the trouble to create a fantastical world, why devolve it into that?
Well, I think that's one of those things that's easier to execute in books than it is in film or TV show. Film and TV show will almost invariably find itself needing to focus almost exclusively on characters.
Mhm.
And of course, character drama is always the hallmark of soap operas and that kind of thing. And so when you lean into the character drama as your main propelling force, it's really easy for it to digress, especially as you spin it out season after season after season, and it's harder and harder to balance between ideas and characters. The books are a lot more successful with that because they
Mhm.
can explore at a lot more length, the science and information backbone of the narrative. And it's interesting, science, and it's something that shapes almost every scene of the books. Every space battle in that series is entirely shaped by physics, and interesting physics. I mean, I've heard from a lot of people who are both interested in legit science and then also read those books that they're extremely accurate in the kinds of challenges and questions they're considering. But that also tells you something about their creative process going in, that they had to always ask that question: does the science work? And
Mhm.
I think horror does have to have internal consistency. You can't just arbitrarily have weird shit happen.
No,
I
well,
mean, you
I've
can, but
reviewed enough movies where they've done that, and we are the most horror fans. I think are most forgiving because we know we're going to get like 9 out of 10 like horrible movies, just like absolute.
and then
But
we're
it's
like,
mainly due with the visuals, because of the budget constraints. But when it's a bad story,
mhm.
that just takes it right. Fantasy doesn't seem to. That's a genre really can't get physics right. Um, especially with travel, like Game of Thrones was terrible for it. 1 minute they're halfway across the continent,
Oh,
then they're there like 2 hours later. I couldn't even bring myself to watch that silly Rings of Power series, but apparently they did the same. They swam across, walked across Middle Earth and swam across an ocean in a day, and you're like, really? Like, where at least science fiction has that discipline,
mhm.
and even though you're constrained, maybe that discipline helps, gives the foundation for storytelling. So, is there something to be said about maybe having that as well? I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Oh no.
I like good stories. At the end of the day, that's my thing. Doesn't matter if it's a well-told story and a told story, and I am gripped, and you make me care about the characters. Job's done.
No, I mean,
It's
one thing I always tell folk, especially people getting into writing, is that when you start off with a blank page,
funnily
you could
enough.
do you can do absolutely anything.
Mhm.
And there are no rules. You can say whatever you want. The second you start putting words on the page, though, you begin establishing constraints for yourself. That's your opening scene is going to create rules for this character. You'll introduce your character's desire, for example. You'll start thinking about, okay, what am I expecting people to sympathize with or hate, perhaps. But you start establishing these rules and expectations, and that's basically, once you start establishing those rules, you now have limits that you have to adhere to. If characters act wildly out of their established rules and dynamics, it's jarring for the readers. Maybe you have a reason for it in the plot, but it's got to be clear. Otherwise, your readers can be like, well, that doesn't, this character doesn't make sense. I don't understand what this character is trying to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to want them to do, or I don't understand what the stakes are. These are a lot of questions that people are thinking in the backs of their minds when books stay, don't remain consistent to what they're trying to build from the beginning. And science fiction, I think, does get a little bit of benefit from the fact that it already knows, your writer probably already knows going in that there are going to be rules about how they're going to compose, putting limitations on yourself and then figuring out how we can stretch them and push them while also working within them. I mean, that's the hallmark of a lot of some, honestly, ingenious creativity. That's how we end up with a story that's truly disarming, because it feels familiar, but then it does something wholly unexpected in a way that completely makes sense. That's ultimately some of the most compelling effects. It's what makes a lot of the best twists in plot, where you read it and you reach the plot twist and you should have seen it coming. It hits you immediately. Oh my God, I missed all of that. But it's exactly the rules that were being established for you all along, and you just didn't pay attention to them right. I saw somebody,
or the story has taken you away that it's subtly there, so it's almost a good thing, because then you can go back a second time. There's nothing better than go back a second time and reading over just to look for the plot points.
Oh, absolutely.
You enjoy the story, you enjoy the ride the first time, and then the second time, like, oh, there it is, right. And
absolutely,
you almost get better value for your experience, because going over the same story again but with a different perspective.
Well,
I've always said this about Lord of the Rings. Anyone that struggles to read, it's a hefty book. I've always said break it down into 3 parts. Read the story, ignore the songs. Go back, read the songs, ignore the story, and then go back and read the whole thing. And it comes together so much better. And like I said, even about rules, one of my complaints has been the homogenization of monsters. Vampires are no longer vampires, werewolves are no longer werewolves, zombies are no longer zombies. It's all this looks the same, acts the same virus thingy. And the rules are then thrown out the window, and then there's no challenge anymore.
Well, yeah, I think to some extent, as monsters have become subgenres. So when vampires first started in literature with Dracula and things like that, I mean, they were a common folk tale. They cropped up in a couple of different forms or resembling that form in various different books. But for the most part, they were a monster. They were this evil thing that preyed on people. Werewolves are kind of the same way. It was a curse. And now, though, as stories have proliferated in those, reusing those monsters, basically you've ended up with a chunk of readership who buys those books not because of the horror, but because they want to be those monsters. So at that point, once you have, the Anne Rice Vampire Club, for example, you have people who no longer want the downsides of being a vampire, and literally the whole point of the vampire mythos, or at least it's sort of the Judeo-Christian origin of it, is that idea that you're sacrificing the light of day and a lot of your sensual pleasures, like eating and drinking, at things that aren't blood, for eternal life. That's the idea behind it. That you then become this thing of darkness that's really kind of consigned to misery. You've just alleviated yourself of one fear, the fear of death. But a lot of people, they're really interested in this idea of immortality, and so they no longer, they're like, okay, but can we have this, but without all the blood drinking and the sunshine loss? So you get sparkling,
which isn't the vampire.
vampires.
They want something else, and it's
exactly.
Back to the game. This baby language, just mollycoddling. Like I said, this whole like I reached my limit with Stephanie Myers. that just broke me. If I'm honest,
absolutely.
I'm just like, nah, I'm out.
and she
No
knocked
more.
out both vampires and werewolves in the same series.
Yeah.
Now, somebody did say, I will say, somebody asked a question down at the bottom.
Yeah, we have a couple here. I was trying to get them, but I don't want to interrupt. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We actually need to go back a minute. So, Chris was like, "How did you first come to work with Wicked House Publishing?"
So,
because that's one of the hurdles, I think, for anyone that's wanting to get published is, will they tear my work apart? Will they do this? Or I'll always have this manuscript that'll never get anywhere. It's a big fear or like a hurdle people think they'll never get over.
So a couple of things I'll mention just to set this up. So first off, folks should know this: the Mobius Store is actually my third attempt at a novel. I had an early novel I wrote when I was in my 20s, and it was a big sprawling beast of a book that really it's been tucked forever into a drawer and will never see the light of day. And I really hope it stays that way. But I was kind of learning a lot about writing in the process. I was trying to figure out how you tell scenes, how you have characters that have progressive arcs across a substantial length of material instead of trying to do it in short bursts like in a short story. But and then I wrote a young adult book that actually got some traction with agents. It just never got taken by a publishing house. And I still periodically tinker with that and send it out. Who knows if it'll ever see the light of day. I'm actually pretty happy with that book. But I haven't had a chance or the inclination for recently to really sit down and try to figure out if there's anything I could do to make it better. Now, so that brings me to the Mobius Store. And first off, that book did take a couple years for me to write. I did some research up front. I got really interested in folklore and mythology, especially Eastern European mythology, and that kind of fuels a lot into the narrative. I spent a couple years writing it, marketed it for a little while with agents, and then the pandemic hit, and that really derailed a lot of the things that I was doing. And one thing it did, though, was it created a lot of anxiety for myself, for my kids, and things like that. And I ended up channeling that into a lot of writing. And so I actually wrote a second, or I guess it's technically my fourth novel, which is coming out at the end of the summer. It's called Gala Talk, and once I finished the main draft of that, I started marketing both that and the Mobius Store out to agents and publishers and things like that. And one day, as I was researching various different markets, I stumbled across an advertisement on Facebook for Wicked House Publishing, and they were new press at the time, and they had one book out. So they had. They had just announced their first title, Mr. Nightmare by Joe Scipione, which is a great book. I really liked it. And they had another title, Monsters of Mulligan Hollow, I think is the title, and that one was due out as well. And so I kind of liked the feel that they were presenting themselves with. So I was like, you know what, let's check these folk out. And as far as the actual submission process goes, if you do a little bit of research into publishing and getting an agent and reaching out to presses, you find there's kind of a standard manuscript packet that you're expected to basically have on hand. There's a query cover letter that has a series of conventional steps that you're expected to follow. And one of the things that a lot of folk are looking for is just simply the professionalism of your query letter, that you know what it's supposed to do, that you're able to present aspects of your work clearly and succinctly, things like, a pitch line. Then you also need to be able to sort of say, what are the comparable books on the market that, you'd be expecting to tap into? What's a one paragraph summary that boils the main plot elements down into a digestible form? What are your writing credentials? Do you have a marketing plan? So there's kind of a very fixed set of conventions. You then typically also include with that, and this varies from publisher to publisher, but there's going to be a summary of the book, and it's it'll usually be anywhere between 500 words to 2,000 words, depending on who you're reaching out to. But basically, you're expected to cover every major plot point and development in core character arcs. Again, it's a test of the clarity of your vision for the work. Your publisher wants to be able to read through that and see that you know what you're trying to say with your book, or what you're trying to present their readers. Because if you don't know, that's going to suggest that the text itself is going to be problematic for them. And then on top of that, I'll admit I don't remember the sample length that Wicked House requests. You'll see that that varies as well. Some folks
obviously you've got Wicked House on your website, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, check out the description, folks. Click on the link, visit the website, give Andrew some love. You check out Wicked House there. Plug.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, they're really fantastic. I've actually really enjoyed all of the books that they put out so far. I'm actually, it's funny because I went into them a little bit blind, and I feel like I won the lottery with them. They've been absolutely fabulous as a publisher. The quality of the books they're putting out has been outstanding. I'm really proud to have my books appearing in their calendar. But yeah, the last thing you need is a sample. It runs any. Some folk will ask for 5 pages, some for 10, some for 25, some for the first 3 chapters, some for the first 50 pages. The biggest thing is whoever you're sending your work to, whether it be Wicked House or somebody else. And by the way, Wicked House is in fact accepting manuscripts right now for consideration. Basically go to the publisher's website, very carefully read their guidelines. They're usually very explicit in what they're expecting, and do not deviate from those things. Look up, if they ask you for a cover letter, simply Google what are conventions for a cover letter for a novel. If they're asking for a synopsis, what are conventions of writing a synopsis for a novel? Follow the conventions, because it's part of the professionalism, it's part of presenting yourself clearly. Then beyond that, though, basically I had this really weird month where I got replies from both Cactus Moon Press about my book Gala Talk first, actually. And, I was already super excited because I also, I've been promoting Mobius Store extremely heavily because it's the one that came out first. But I also really love the story I told in Gala Talk. Then like 3 weeks later, I got the Wicked House acceptance as well. And it was the weirdest feeling because I've been writing a while. I had, like I said, 2 novels, one of which I think is just a failed novel. The other, which was a good book that never just found a place that it meant to be.
Failed? I try to, I don't like that word. And I think it puts people off because, once again, it's back to this presumption of I must succeed. And therefore, creativity is only an option if it's instant success. Where you might see it as a failed novel, but that exercise in putting pen to paper, metaphorically speaking, putting it together into a complete work and taking you through the process of going from an idea in your head to actually, here's a novel, whether it's sold or not. Do you really consider that a failure?
I mean,
when you go to move on, it's that story you mightn't be happy with. It mightn't have got the traction. But you, not only the story and putting it together, but putting that into something tangible. Because how many pipe dreams are out there? How many wish upon a star folks are out there that think they're the greatest and they'll write one day or it's in the back shelf, but you've actually taken that step to putting a thought and an idea in your head into something physically tangible. I personally wouldn't consider that a failure.
Well, I mean, it depends on what you're looking at, with the word failure.
Well, that's what I'm at. How do you consider that a failure then? Because what's your metric for success? Because it's, to me, everything I've said there, that's succeeding.
Well, I don't find failure and success to be antonyms. One thing that I think is really crucial to remember is that success is the time you got through after a series of failures. All those failures were part of the process of getting to success. And, I actually like to embrace that word because I find that if we realize and acknowledge and say, you know what, this didn't work. This didn't do what I wanted it to do. I need to figure out where it didn't work, why it didn't work, and how to prevent that in the future. When we take it apart, it's like talking about a failed engine at that point. So that's neither good nor bad.
And it's part of this culture as well. What I would consider a failure is you put that together, it didn't work out, and you're like, huh, not my fault.
See, I would call that a waste. See, that, like, I wouldn't call it a failure. I'd call that a waste. I mean, I definitely do not think that writing that, it was a sprawling 750-page book. I definitely don't think it was a waste to do it. I learned so much.
Yes, right. Don't mind getting into semantics, because this is actually an interesting conversation. Generally, when people get into semantics, it's very antagonistic, but this is actually a good example of getting into it because it's both from a positive aspect.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's actually a good thought. Yeah, not wasting your time. It wasn't a wasted effort because that's, once again, people get so bogged down about this thing not taking off and then the
Hmm.
stop. And would you agree or not that the important thing about being creative is not to stop, even if it is a hobby or an outlet?
Well,
Where
I think
so many folks just like, oh, hit the first hurdle, nah, done.
oh, I think it comes all the way back to the beginning of our conversation,
Mhm.
where I think creativity just should be part of our day-to-day lives. It could be 30 minutes a day, it could be a couple times a week, but yeah, I mean, whether or not we get accolades or praise, I mean, if we're being creative for praise, then we're not really thinking about what we're supposed to be getting from creativity.
Mhm.
It's like, yeah, I mean, I love I love that people seem to be really liking the Mobius store. I am proud of that. It does make me happy, and it's exciting to have that happen. But at the same time, even if people hated it, I had a blast writing it. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed working on this book. Like I said, it took a couple years to do the main writing of it. I did a lot of rewriting as well, revisiting all of these characters, and I mean, you learn about yourself in doing this too. Especially horror, where you're kind of pushing your own boundaries and
Oh,
you're trying to
absolutely.
fit.
It's the
You
I
know,
think it's the best, hands down, the best genre. And I've said before, I could not spend like the amount of hours doing this and the background and the admin and the reaching out and the networking and the scheduling. If I didn't enjoy it or enjoy the genre, I couldn't do
hmm
it. I couldn't spend that amount of time. That's why I don't. I've kind of found myself drawn away from other things because I don't have that enjoyment,
yeah. Oh no,
and
that's fair.
that's to me that's not a waste of my time because I feel fulfilled. You know, because I'm seeing a return. There's something being created for the effort put in, and that alone is worth it. Like you said with your book, but yeah, if people enjoy what you do, even better. It's just a little bit of icing on the top. And I think people have to appreciate that. Don't you agree that appreciate your thing for what it is? The success kind of comes afterwards, and appreciate the success maybe as a separate thing, but not as a requirement to create.
Oh, I entirely agree. I mean, I think a lot of the best books out there, and really, a lot of the best anything out there, comes when the creator made them simply because they wanted to. And that was it was something that, regardless, even if they were like living on an island, and had no internet, no mail, etc., they would have sat down and written that book, written that poem, written that song, regardless of whether or not they had an
Actually, good
audience
little
for
segment
it.
into another question. Now we can bring Kathleen's question up. Sorry, folks, I'm not ignoring you in the chat. I'm just trying to, not just be like, ba, 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 answer this question now, and then not give, give Andrew a chance to breathe. But seeing you mentioned poetry there, as a poet, can you tell us more about the constraints help you shape a story, a poem, a message? Because poetry is a tricky one. To me, my poetry is very emotional. And if
Mhm.
I'm not a particular state of emotion getting it out, I just can't willy nilly make up rhyming words. To me, it feels silly.
So yeah, my poetry is very not rhyming. I do things like internal rhyme. I love assonance, consonants, alliteration, and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't do a whole lot of fixed meter and fixed rhyme work. But that being said, so with poetry, first off, you know, I actually feel in a lot of ways that poetry has less constraints than a lot of other forms. In a lot of ways, the one constraint that I see in poetry is whether or not our reader is going to understand it. And from there, at that point, I'm trying to pull out all the stops, not to hide or complicate meaning, but to make meaning clear. And I find that more often than not, what I'm really trying to capture in poems is ideas, emotions, or experiences for which the language does not already exist to express it. And so I'm trying to craft this single page or couple of pages where every single part of it is working almost exclusively to try to convey a singular idea, or small limited set of ideas. So the audience that I'm thinking about becomes the primary constraint? Is this going to be something that they're going to access, that, or am I going to create this dense web that's going to alienate them away from it? Or, am I going to say what I'm trying to say in a way that's so stripped down and so basic that they don't really have a reason to read my piece as opposed to any other piece? You know, I think, more so than any other genre in a lot of ways, I think poetry does require an understanding of, sort of an idea of an audience, like that we want to communicate something, and the text itself. And so I think that's also partially because I hate to say it, as much as I love writing poetry, I do find audiences are more limited for it. You don't have the quite mass explosion. You don't get many Stephen Kings in poetry.
No, it's very, very niche, isn't it?
Yeah.
Once you're, what Chaucer, oh God, what's the one coming top of my head?
Shakespeare, Spencer.
Yeah. Well, was Shakespeare a poet, really?
He's a sonneteer.
Yeah. More aspects, but his stuff was primarily geared for the stage.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. But you have like Lord Byron, William Carlos Williams, Robert Frost. You have a handful of names that sort of rose to pretty household prominence. But
Robert Burns, of course.
Yeah,
that's who you get a name and like it's rattling about there in front of you. Like, get down there. I don't need you up here. I need you here so I can let you out.
But no, when I sit down to write poems, a lot of the times I'm not even sure I'm really sitting down to write a poem until I'm actually into the process. Instead, it's kind of like I mentioned earlier, where I really do a lot of times just sit down and I know I've got time blocked off for writing. And, maybe I open an idea that I was thinking about earlier, or maybe I'm just starting fresh with a blank page. But, I do just sort of ask this question, okay, what do I say first? And when that comes out, or I get an idea that I need to start thinking about how to say it, the decision about how to start presenting it doesn't come until I start putting words on the page. Again, the constraints unfold from our decisions as writers, not from pre-existing conditions. So, as we engage, with that first word, the first sentence, the first line or first paragraph or what have you, what we need to be doing is we need to be listening to the work we're creating and start thinking about, what is this work starting to do? Where is it starting to take these ideas? Where is it starting to take this expression?
So when you're putting your pieces together into publications, does the publication, each book, is that one thought told in many various formats, or do you just go by poem looking for an audience? Because that's where a lot of poetry books, I think, can get a wee bit confused. Yes, the poem itself has an audience in mind, but the collection tends to not to. So now that you've brought that up, do you have that in mind when you create individual pieces? You're like, okay, how do I put this together into a collection that's going to reach that particular audience?
Okay, so there's a couple different ways that works out. So first off, I do have, I guess the best way to call it is, sort of one-off pieces where I just sit down and I write a poem. And then, a week later, I write another poem, and then I write another poem some other time. And, then, one thing that'll happen though is, after I've done that for a little while, I'll start to notice that some of the poems have some commonalities with each other. It might be stylistic, it might be their use of images or something along those lines. But also I start to develop some groupings. And at that point, I then look and I start to be more serious about, okay, what do I really have emerging here? And, if I only have like 3 or 4 poems, there's not too much to do with that. So that's not really a starting point even for a book unless it's really compelling, and I've not encountered that yet. But, once I've got a body of poems that is sort of coalesced where I can kind of see enough commonalities that they're grouping together, and, I'm likely, maybe 20, 25 poems, 30, 40 pages. At that point, I start to say, okay, I think I have a collection shaping up. So first off, can I take what I have here and create a meaningful sequence out of them? Do some of these more naturally lead into others? So I start looking to impose a bit of structure on it. And from there, then I start to ask, okay, what are the holes in the structure? Where are the gaps between pieces that I need to fill in with new material that's not been written yet? So then I do start composing poems deliberately to fit the collection. Other times I might make revisions to some of the existing poems to make them fit more fluidly with the other two. But so I do feel like I'm working towards an overarching cohesion to the piece, but at the same time, especially in the early phases, I write poems that are independent on their own. And then even once I'm late in the stage of a collection, I'm still writing other poems. They're just not for that collection. I have other folders on my laptop.
So it's not an immediate, concern. It's when it happens, or when it happens, it's ready. It's very organic process then.
Exactly. And, I've been creating in various different, genres, poetry, short fiction and novels for a long time. And one thing that, I decided early on was that I did want, I basically decided I plan to always do this, that, no matter what else is going on, I'll always keep working at stuff just because I like it. It's a way I like to engage myself when nothing else is going on, if nothing else. But so at that point, that takes a little bit of the pressure off to be churning out regular books. And so, for the first few years, though, I have a few hundred unpublished poems. Granted, they're probably not in a state of polish that would get them rapidly taken in journals if I sent them out. But, they're seeds that I could work with. They're pieces that I could probably build into something else. And, similarly, short stories, I have, a folder of 30, 40 works in progress right now. That some of them are more I'm much more focused on, others are kind of on the back burner. Then I have the trunk that a lot of writers talk about, pieces that I finished but didn't feel like I could find a home for, and so I shuffled them aside. And all of that stuff accumulates over time, and then at some point I'll start noticing, hey, I've been writing about father-son relationships a lot lately in my science fiction. I wonder if I can start grouping these together. And so I'll start sifting through some of that old work. And suddenly, you find pieces that didn't fit with anything before that have a new place right now. Or maybe, you revisit one of those old works with this new context in mind, and suddenly you know how to revise it to make it new. But I think to some extent, just kind of steadily pursuing ideas, exploring, as you accumulate material, you give yourself more and more options for how to start combining those things into larger pieces.
So how often do you write then, as a general rule of thumb?
It varies a little bit. Starting about a month before the release of the novel, I did have to scale back on fresh production because, I was doing the editing and revising for the book, also going through things like layout proofs and that sort of stuff. I'm a full-time lecturer at a university, and so I also had final grading to do, which is a lot of reading. Then of course I have kids and a wife, and I like to make sure I'm making time for them too, as much as I can. Sometimes it does get a little bit of a back burner, but for the most part, I probably do explicit writing time 3-4 times a week, during an average week. During a busy, a particularly creative work, I'm writing every day. And then during some stretches when I'm just absolutely swamped, I do actually pull back just as a matter of self-care. Sometimes you just, even positive stress is still stress on your mind and body. And so, you do cut everything out occasionally.
So is it, would you say self-awareness has to be a major component, and that ties in with the discipline? Because I think a lot of people think if we can just jump in and just blast it out in a week, that's it, it's all sorted. And then when it doesn't happen, the burnout, or somebody like, I'm terrible for it, I'll start and stop. I'm so slow. It's like I'll start a project and then it'll be months before I start again, and then it becomes a pain. It's like, oh, I'm done this off. And then I put it in the back burner. When do you have to tap yourself on the shoulder and say, okay, I've put this in the back burner enough, I need to do it? Does there come a point?
Yeah, there really does. Because if nothing else, if you do take too long off from a project, you really can fall out of sync with it. So, you really can be just distanced from it, so that it's extremely difficult to get back into working on it. It's not to say you can't, but you're increasing the challenge the longer you're out. But that being said, I like talking about writing as a discipline. Very specifically, I think it's the best word to understand what writing really is. It's a lot
Hmm.
like playing guitar. It's a lot like painting or drawing or playing a sport. All of them are these learned skills that require assiduous practice in order to keep our skills sharpened, so that when we need to perform, we're at our peak. An athlete doesn't take 6 months off and then go play a major game.
Hmm.
They have to train and practice. So steadily writing is a really important part of it, not because you're always going to be doing amazing work, and you don't even necessarily need to be writing on a specific project that's like the project that's the meaningful one to you. Really any form of sequencing words, organizing ideas can help keep you sharp.
Hmm.
So if you're the kind of person, for example, who's a lawyer and you're writing legal briefs, that writing still matters. That's still part of the practice, and just using language to produce ideas and communicate to other people. But typing emails, even typing on social media, can still, if you're thinking about your writing, if you're not just slopping down words as fast as you can,
Hmm.
if you're actually approaching it with a little bit of craft, you are keeping your self sharp. But I think
That's
you know
actually a good that's a good thought there to have. An idea. People maybe don't realize that. Instead of firing out the text speak on social media when you're putting a thought, take a moment and compose it.
yeah
Think as if
and
you're performing a short story. You just keep your craft, going. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. You're writing an email.
Hmm.
Put a salutation at the top. Write it in complete sentences. Don't just like chop it up and get to get that idea out as quick as possible to move on to the next thing. You know, Pay attention to what you're doing. And I think that goes even beyond writing to a certain extent. This comes back to our earlier conversation about social media and sort of rapid fire stimulation and distraction. That whatever it is we're doing, we should pay attention to it. You're going grocery shopping, enjoy it for what it is. You're writing an email to somebody, pay attention to it, do it as well as you can. You're going for a walk, don't be on your phone the whole time. Instead, you're on the walk, you might as well look at
I'm
where
going to
you're
apologize
going.
to anyone now that gets in touch with the show because I'm usually trying to get things organized, keep things succinct, so that right, we're doing step A, step B. This is the time, the date. Here we go. Now they're going to start getting flurry emails back. Hello and welcome to Getting in Touch with the Horrific podcast. It is so wonderful to hear from you. 3 paragraphs later, we'll get to the point.
Well, I mean,
We'll give it up.
But I mean, in a very serious sense, though,
Yeah.
since the books came out, I've spent a lot of time on social media. Books of Horror is one of my favorite, Facebook groups.
Mhm.
And one thing I've noticed is, if you send somebody a message either as a reply or you reach out to somebody through a direct message, if you are a little more full in expressing yourself, people seem delighted by it.
Funny enough, I've found that actually just with my interactions, and there's authors. That's because we've featured like 70 plus authors, through one of our segments. But a lot of ones that don't get it just can't communicate.
Mhm.
Like even by when is podcast? How do I do this? No. It's like, what is that? What? And you're going to get me to read out something? No. you know, uh, when you ask somebody to send you an email and then they send you a DM with how I do this or something, you're like, what?
Well, yeah,
Instantly, I'm lost. It's like It's amazing the number of people that just for some reason can't grasp that simple concept. It's a form of communication.
well, I worked 8 years as a barista in a coffee shop, and
Hmm.
one of the things that really stands out to me is there's customers who walk in and they're like, "Hey, how are you doing?" And when you answer, they actually listen to your answer and then they respond to it. You get 2 beats, maybe you're not like getting into a deep conversation, but those extra 2 beats of conversation make a world of difference in what's actually communicated there. One communication, if you're actually paying attention, makes everybody involved feel heard and attended to. In contrast, you get other people who, you're like, hey, how you doing? And they say, large coffee. And, there's an abrasiveness and an unpleasantness to the whole exchange at that point. Neither person is getting anything positive out of it. That experience is a negative event. And, honestly, life is just too damn short for it to be full of these negative, choppy experiences where our only goal is to get to the next negative, choppy experience. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to enjoy doing it. I'm going to make it decent. I think just paying attention even just to everyday life and interactions is really crucial, and something that's it's all part of this larger idea of just finding a way to better express ourselves, make our lives a little more pleasant on the day to day, and just reduce the stress of all these things that are always chipping away at us by paying attention to where we're at right now.
Or just get those dark thoughts out on the story format or poetry. And
oh, absolutely.
It's because it's funny. I've yet to encounter a horror creative with a negative mindset. And yet we're the bad people. We're the evil ones.
In high school, okay. And in high school, I was actually a vocalist in a death metal band. For the most part, everybody assumed like I had to be this really violent person, or that, I had to love really dark things. But it's like, no, the whole point is just to release negative emotions, and it's an absolute blast to do it. You feel great after the performance. And, most of the people I know who listen to or love heavy metal and stuff like that, it's the same thing. People assume that because of the demonic imagery that gets associated with a lot of it, that they're these dark, horrible people, but they're usually the nicest folk I know.
Notice the Eddies.
Absolutely.
A collection of Eddies. I'm going to see them in July. I was looking up a ticket earlier on, you don't get a printed ticket anymore, so I can't sit and stare at it. Like your typical Iron Maiden fan. I have to call up the app and go, I'm going there soon.
I miss my little stack of physical tickets.
All my stuff's going now when I moved, but God, I'm on another tangent now. I've lost my train of thought. Oh man, it went out of my head. I had something already on and it's gone. But this weird thing about horror fans and horror creators, like, oh, you're terrible people. You do this, you do that. And it's like, look in the mirror, mate. You're the one knifing people in the back. You're the one that spreads the nastiness, actual real life nastiness in people's faces, where we're just getting on with things. It's like this culture war movement. They try to bring it into horror, and all horror fans going like, "What? We've dealt with this 50 years ago. Go away. We're already we don't care. What are you trying to do here?" They tried it with the Hellraiser reboot. They tried all that winding people up and stuff, and it might have worked with other genres, but it came to horror and just defeated like a damn squid because no, we don't care.
Well, I
just find it hilarious.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think to some extent, one thing that insulates horror against that is we go into horror with an expectation of flaws, and I don't mean in bad storytelling. I mean, most of the best horror has deeply flawed characters. You have sort of complex interactions, and it's part of the genre. You hit it and you expect it to be there. And
family goes out for a picnic. It's a beautiful sunny day. They're by the lake. We know it's going to go wrong. We're just waiting for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the sunnier and the more idyllic the opening of a horror novel, the worse it's going to get. Somebody just graduated and has been offered a delightful job and given a brand new car as a gift. You're like, oh man, they're screwed.
Yeah, that's it. You're in trouble now.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They're smiling, happy. They're humming their favorite tune. When they're humming their favorite tune, they're doomed.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But no, I mean, horror just has, I mean, it deals with all aspects of society really fluidly, and none of them are jarring or shocking to see as a result, because horror tends to explore the best and worst of us. And then from the writing angle, I think sort of that, coming back to that idea is, sometimes it seems like horror writers are just the happiest people and all. And I think to some extent, we produce this stuff because we are acutely aware that it's not real. In fact, the whole craft behind horror is working hard to convince your audience that this could be real.
Mhm.
And when we approach it from that craft lens, I mean, there's an almost inevitable distance between us and a lot of the horror we write, especially when we get into genres like vampire horror, creature horror. There is admittedly a certain brutal real world horror that can, I'm not sure that this would apply as clearly to. I've done some work as a slush reader for a couple of horror magazines and horror adjacent
I was going
magazines.
to actually ask you about Symposium.
Oh yeah.
Are you still a senior editor at Symposium?
Yeah, basically, we just put out an issue with a theme of attention, and we're in the process of talking about our next issue. And basically, it's one of those things that's sort of a labor of love of everybody involved. I came on board a couple issues ago because I really liked working with them when one of their editors decided to take one of my pieces for publication, and it was a delightful process. And in the process, I brought in a couple other writers that also contributed to that issue. And from there, I developed just a really great relationship with the people, the people involved with the magazine. And so when the following issue was being planned, I was like, I'd love to help you out as as an editor. That's I've done 2 issues at this point as senior editor, and definitely talking about doing the 3rd one at this point. It's one of those things where all of us are doing it for free. All of the money we make goes back into the magazine and trying to keep it perpetuated. Our editor in chief is that was on board when I started, stepped down because life just was too demanding, and so
life stuff, it always gets in the way at times.
Yeah,
You try to
exactly.
ignore it, and
Yeah. Oh, and it never stops happening,
no.
But no, then somebody else stepped up, and they were delightful to work with. So I mean, yeah, at the moment, I'm perfectly thrilled to continue working with them. I am anticipating at least one more issue. If not, we don't. But beyond that, it's largely going to depend on what's going on with me, whether I feel passionate about it, because putting out a magazine is a decent chunk of work, communication. And it's really important that everybody who's directly involved in it is really on board. If anybody, it's not like we can threaten to withhold pay if somebody's not not doing what they're supposed to. At that point, it's like, well, we're doing this, and it's all coming together because we all want it to come together.
Yeah, that's always a problem with voluntary projects. You're on the graces of others, and if you aren't on board with each other, if people don't have the same vision, it just falls apart.
Absolutely.
I've had that with previous projects. It's one person might have a very strong vision, but if people don't share it, it just dissipates and becomes a labor, becomes a chore to do. And then it's, like I said, it's a waste of time, not necessarily a failure, but if you're wasting your time doing something, then why do it? Move on to something. It's all part of that. When do you recognize it's time to stop working on a project? You're beating your head against a brick wall. It's time to either put the brakes on it, put it to the side, or move on completely.
So one thing I will say is, I write in a lot of different styles. Some things are more, for lack of a better word, serious than others. Some of my pieces are pretty humorous. Some are really dark, and some are very personal. But one thing they all have in common is that when I'm working on them, I care whether or not I actually finish them. If I have a piece that, it occurs to me that I just don't care if I finish it, that's probably a piece I'm going to, move on from, if only temporarily. Maybe
Mhm.
I'll come back to it in a while and be like, maybe I am more interested in this piece again. Yeah, I mean, I've got a whole folder full of pieces that I started and, made, a lot of them I made 2 pages in, and then I was just like, this idea is not really taken off. It's not really doing what I wanted to do, and I don't know where it's going. Sometimes I have 30, 40 pages of a piece. And I decide to move on because I don't have a real vision for what I'm doing with it. And yeah, I mean, so that's kind of really the metric, is that I have a lot of things that I can spend my time on. Again, family, work. I actually have hobbies outside of writing too.
Mhm.
Like I like to draw. I DM an ongoing Dungeons and Dragons game with the family. I do play video games, especially with the
Careful.
kids.
You into TTRPGs?
Yeah,
Have you seen our role playing content and my buddy's channel? That's what I was doing earlier on. Actually, he was on character creation session 0 on buddy's Dragonlance channel. Getting
oh
there. Actually,
really?
we're going to do Raven. We're currently in the middle of a Dragonlance. Oh dear. Yeah, this is going to be another hour of nerdiness. I was going to hope you've got a bit of time to spare. But yeah, we're setting up for a Ravenloft game in September. We're currently in the middle of Shadow of the Dragon Queen.
Okay.
It's good. And then I'm currently playing a Call of Cthulhu campaign, Towers of the King, which is with another group. It's a lot of fun. I've tried to explain to people how great that is, role playing games, for stretching the imagination. You don't have to be an actor, but it's definitely one of the best mediums. And that's another misunderstood one, like horror. Oh, you're a devil worshiper. Oh, you're stealing babies. Oh, you're doing this.
Oh.
It's like, mate, have you met role players? Calm down.
Oh man,
You're
yeah.
going to get roped in. I'm just warning you now. You think you've gotten away with just one interview?
Oh no, I'm happy to come back and keep talking.
No, we
Yeah,
actually end the game. That's just set some time aside. It's going to happen.
absolutely. But no, I mean, yeah. So I have other interests,
Mm-hmm.
and so you know, I do pick and choose my interests. Though I mean, I really do things that I feel have value. Whether it be playing Dungeons and Dragons, or being DMing the game, or spending time with playing painting, or playing Mario Kart with the kids. I like to garden too. All of those things are meaningful and matter to me, and so basically if I have one story in front of me, and it's not worth working on that versus either working on a different story, or hanging out with my kids, or playing a board game
Mm-hmm.
with them, or something like that. That is that point. That's the big metric that I use, is if it doesn't matter to me, I don't I do tend to move on from there.
That's good. It's never permanent either.
Oh yeah.
It's just shifting perspective, refreshing yourself. Like the old saying is, sometimes a change is as good as a rest. Kathleen, just as well OGL 1.1 didn't come out then, or else you'd be in trouble. Oh, that was Wizards of the Coast, man. They really kicked themselves in the bum then. silly people. They never experienced nerd rage before. It's like, what is this? Oh man. So what was it made? What was it drew you? And we'll just finish up with a sort of last question here, because I know I can keep you here for hours, and that's I normally set aside an hour for these things, but it's like you could be here forever if I don't exercise some self-discipline. What was it drew you into the horror genre, and what were your kind of drew you down that rabbit hole, and what were your major influences?
So, I mean, that one is kind of a lifelong question. When I was actually really young, my parents were pretty permissive in what we watched. I mean, I did, a lot of it was fairly innocuous stuff, 1950s horror. I was a big fan of The Blob, Them, It, The Terror from Beyond Space, a lot of those sort of, classic, creature features. And I saw Alien when I was 4, and that was actually a really impactful film on me. I watched The Thing and Aliens when I was younger, and at the same time, my dad was a pretty big horror fan, and of course, during the '80s, what we now think of as sort of like the highly conventional horror of like Stephen King and Dean Koontz. I mean, those were the main horror presences, and we had those books in the house. We had almost every Stephen King book, a huge chunk of Koontz books. We had Peter Straub.
I think Koontz gets enough credit.
Oh, I think he's got some great stories. I think
he doesn't get the same. I don't think he gets the credit for his work.
Yeah, he seems.
And he's a very varied writer.
Absolutely.
Stephen King's very formulaic after a while, but Koontz is out there with a lot of his stories.
He's got some pretty wild stuff, actually. I mean, I haven't read him in some time, but when I was young, I ate those books up. I read quite a few of them. But yeah, so a lot of my early reading, and it was also just really cool that I was like 10, 12, and I was reading Stephen King and stuff like that. I always felt like there was something a little bit taboo about it, that I wasn't.
Yes, the forbidden fruit, isn't the naughtiness of it? It's like
even though I was totally allowed to read these things.
Yeah.
So, that developed a pretty big love for horror. And it was also, honestly, it was a big part of my relationship with my mom. We still watch a lot of horror movies together when we get the chance, just not nearly as many as we used to. But that's like one of the things we do when we get together and have time. But aside from that, though, that was kind of the foundation for it. That's the thing that really kind of made me aspire to be a horror author. And then since then, it's sort of hard to pin down a lot of my influences because I read all over the place. But if there was any one book I had to say was hugely influential on almost everything I do, it's The Trial by Franz Kafka. It's probably my favorite book of all time. I've read it many, many times. I've read a lot of science fiction in the vein of things like, Kurt Vonnegut and, Arthur C. Clarke and Asimov. Fun little side note. My dad actually had Isaac Asimov as a teacher in a science fiction course, which I always envied him that opportunity. But no, more recently,
I like the Art and Ale series. That was kind of my favorite. I can't remember the detective's name, but that whole idea that you're considered lower than dirt if you're from Earth. You know what I mean? You weren't allowed to travel outside Earth to the better planets who have become more evolved, and that's not even bringing the android aspect of things. And just some great ideas.
Oh yeah, and Philip K. Dick's another one that I really enjoyed. More recently, Jeff Vandermeer has been a big influence. I'm a huge fan of Annihilation. The first book is another of my favorite books. I've read it numerous times, and I think the Alex Garland film is actually a tremendous piece of work as well. It's a really unique film, at least.
Started off, I don't know. I might have to disagree with that one. It's a good premise. Got a good premise. Then they stepped into the through the sort of portal, the shimmer, and then it kind of fell apart, especially towards the end. But then I would say that as well about Arthur C. 2001 Space Odyssey, when they took Dave, and the idea was to advance him to the monolith. That did not play out well on the movie.
No, that did not.
Did not play out well. Nobody got it. If you hadn't read the book, nobody, like, it just didn't translate well. So sometimes we talked about Barker on the show quite a lot. Like recently we're doing Rawhead Rex a couple of weeks time. What were absolutely fantastic stories don't necessarily play out well on screen.
Oh yeah,
Start seeing a pattern there. So it's it could just be the medium, might necessarily take away from the story, which is why folks, you need to get out and read as well. Don't just look at the screen. Get out and actually read a book. Let your imagination fill in the blanks. Don't have the expectation that someone else has put out in front of you. That's why we need more creators. And I suppose last question, just to wrap it up. What's in the near future for you? So what's coming up that people need to get ready for?
Well, I got a couple things. First off, is the biggest thing coming up is that my science fiction horror novel Galatalk comes out either the last week in August or the first week in September, and I am really excited about that. If you're a fan of island horror, it does have a particularly exciting horror location, which is the island of Gali Otok on the Mediterranean Sea. It was home to a Yugoslavian prison that hosted political prisoners. Of the 16,000 people sentenced there, over 4,000 died from disease, exposure, malnutrition, and torturous brutality. My grandfather actually spent some time there, which is how, as an inmate, which is how it kind of came across my radar. But I'm really excited to have that book coming up. Other than that, you got a bunch of pieces of short fiction on their way out through places like Fusion Fragment, Translunar Traveler's Lounge, an anthology called Gods and Globes. I'm working on my next novel at this point. I've got a really strong start on it, about a third of the way into the main draft, and I know exactly what I'm doing with this one, which is funny because I'm usually somebody who describes themselves as a pantser instead of a planner. But this one, I really know exactly what I want to do in it, and I think it's both an intricate and unusual piece that I'm really excited to work on.
Oh, excellent. Right, folks. Obviously, links in the description. Check out Andrew and his work. Give him some support, like all our creators. It's you guys that make us happen. Help give everyone a boost. We need more creators out there, not less. And share love. Andrew, thank you very much for coming on and having a chat. This was wonderful as always. Love just chewing the fat, going on tangents. No structure, just loosely based. That's what we love here, and
as it should be.
Thanks for stepping up. And of course, folks, for segments like this and other segments, I mentioned if you like role playing, check out our Call of Cthulhu series and other games we've played. And of course, do the typey clicky things. Keep it creepy, keep it horrific.